in the pulsing heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers pierced the clouds like monuments of ambition, and the streets hummed with the endless pursuit of wealth. Alexander Sterling stood at the apex. He was a billionaire, the ruthlessly efficient CEO of Sterling Global, and a man who seemingly held the world in the palm of his meticulously tailored hand. Yet as he stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, looking down at the glittering city lights, a profound sense of emptiness washed over him. The luxury that surrounded him, the imported Italian marble, the priceless modern art, the deafening silence of a home that felt more like a museum, suddenly felt suffocating. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, a high-profile charity gala where he would stand beside his stunning fiancée, Vanessa. Vanessa was the quintessential Manhattan socialite, polished, impeccably dressed, and fluent in the language of power and influence. They were the power couple of the financial district, envied by men and emulated by women. But lately, Alex had begun to feel that their relationship was just another corporate merger, a transaction designed to elevate their respective statuses. He adjusted his bespoke tuxedo, the silk fabric feeling heavy against his shoulders. "Harrison," Alex called out his voice, a low, commanding baritone that didn't require volume to carry authority. His executive assistant, a man whose loyalty was matched only by his discretion, stepped out of the shadows of the hallway. "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Where is Vanessa?" The gala starts in less than an hour, and she is rarely late for an event where the press outnumbers the guests. Harrison hesitated, a rare micro-expression of discomfort crossing his usually stoic face. "Miss Kensington's assistant informed me that she had an urgent, last-minute family emergency. She extended her deepest apologies and said she had to travel upstate immediately." Alex turned away from the window, his piercing gray eyes narrowing. "A family emergency. She didn't call me." "I believe she was in a rush, sir," Harrison replied smoothly, though his eyes carefully avoided Alex's gaze. Something intuitive, a razor-sharp instinct that made Alex a lethal force in the boardroom, flared to life. Vanessa's family lived in Connecticut, not upstate New York, and she despised unscripted interruptions to her social calendar. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed her number. It rang to voicemail. He tried again. Nothing. "Cancel the car," Alex ordered abruptly, stripping off his tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto a pristine white sofa. "I'm not going to the gala." "Sir, the board is expecting." "I don't care what they expect, Harrison. Something isn't right." 30 minutes later, Alex was behind the wheel of his unassuming dark Audi, a car he kept for the rare occasions he wanted to move through the city unnoticed. He didn't know exactly where he was going until he remembered a casual remark Vanessa had made earlier that week about a new, ultra-exclusive boutique hotel opening discreetly on the Upper East Side. It was the kind of place designed for secrets. The rain began to fall as he parked a block away, pulling the collar of his dark coat up against the chill. He walked toward the grand, dimly lit entrance of the hotel. He didn't need a reservation. A discreetly slipped $100 bill to a valet confirmed that Vanessa's unmistakable silver Porsche was parked in the VIP garage. Alex bypassed the main lobby, moving with a calculated calmness toward the hotel's secluded lounge. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cigars, aged bourbon, and illicit whispers. And there she was. Vanessa sat in a velvet booth, looking absolutely radiant. But she wasn't crying over a family emergency. She was laughing, her head thrown back, her diamond necklace catching the low light. And she was leaning intimately into the chest of Julian Thorne, a rival investment banker known more for his inherited wealth and sleazy reputation than his business acumen. Julian's hand was resting possessively on Vanessa's thigh. Time seemed to fracture. The ambient jazz music faded into a dull, echoing hum. Alex felt a cold, hard knot form in his chest, not a shattering heartbreak, but a deep, icy realization of absolute betrayal. He didn't storm over. He didn't shout. He was Alexander Sterling. He did not lose control. He simply walked toward the booth, his footsteps silent on the thick carpet. It was Julian who noticed him first. The smirk dropped from the banker's face, replaced by a pale, stammering shock. "Sterling," he breathed out. Vanessa froze. The laughter died in her throat. She turned her head in slow motion, her perfectly manicured hands trembling as her eyes locked onto Alex. The color drained from her flawless face. "Alex," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Alex, what are you doing here? I could ask you the same question." Alex replied, his voice terrifyingly calm. It was the tone he used right before he dismantled a billion-dollar company. "How is the family emergency? Vanessa is Julian here, offering medical assistance." Vanessa scrambled to create distance between herself and Julian, knocking over a crystal glass of champagne in the process. The liquid spilled across the table, dripping onto the floor like tears. "Please let me explain. It's not what it looks like. We were just discussing a private investment." "A private investment," Alex repeated, his gaze dropping to where Julian's hand had been seconds prior. "I see. The returns must be phenomenal." Julian cleared his throat, trying to salvage his shattered ego. "Look, Sterling, it's just business. You know how it is in our world, your world." Alex corrected, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper, "is built on sand, Julian. And Vanessa," he shifted his gaze back to the woman who was supposed to wear his ring. "You traded an empire for a cheap thrill. You told me once that you loved my ambition. I see now you only loved the account balance that came with it. Alex, please?" Vanessa reached out, her eyes wide with sudden, desperate panic. She knew exactly what she was losing. Not just a man, but the unparalleled status of being Mrs. Alexander Sterling. "I made a mistake. It means nothing. You're my future. I was your future," Alex said, stepping back from her reaching hand as if she were toxic. "Now you're just another bad investment I'm writing off." He didn't wait for her tears or her apologies. He turned on his heel and walked out of the lounge, the heavy oak doors swinging shut behind him, cutting off the sound of her frantic sobbing. When Alex returned to his penthouse, the silence was no longer suffocating. It was deafening. He walked over to the minibar, poured himself a glass of neat whiskey, and stared at the city below. For the first time in his 32 years, the wealth, the power, the relentless drive. It all tasted like ash. He was surrounded by people who loved his money, his title, and his influence. But nobody actually knew him. Nobody loved the man behind the designer suits and the corporate armor. He walked into his expansive bedroom, his eyes landing on a small, worn wooden box sitting incongruously on a velvet-lined dresser. It belonged to his late grandfather, a humble man who had spent his life working the soil on a small rundown farm in Willow Creek, a forgotten town hours away from the city's neon glare. His grandfather used to say, asterisk, "When the world gets too loud, Alex, go find the dirt. The earth doesn't lie, and it doesn't care how much money you have in your pocket." Asterisk. Alex set his glass down. He made a decision, a radical, seemingly insane decision for a man of his stature. He picked up his phone and dialed his assistant. Harrison. Sir, is everything all right, the gala? I need you to clear my schedule. All of it. The board meetings, the merger negotiations, the press interviews. Postpone everything indefinitely. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Indefinitely, sir. May I ask where you will be? I am taking a leave of absence, Alex said firmly, stripping off his expensive watch and tossing it onto the bed. He walked over to his closet, ignoring the rows of Armani and Tom Ford, and reached into the deep back corner where he kept a few old faded flannel shirts and a pair of scuffed work boots. And Harrison, if anyone asks, Alexander Sterling is out of reach. Do not try to contact me unless the company is literally burning to the ground. Before Harrison could protest, Alex ended the call. He packed a simple duffel bag, leaving behind the credit cards with limitless caps, taking only a small amount of cash, and the keys to an old beat-up pickup truck his company kept for utility work. As he took the service elevator down to the basement garage, a strange sensation washed over him. The crushing weight of the CEO title, the sting of Vanessa's shallow betrayal, the suffocating expectations of high society, they all began to lift. He climbed into the cab of the rusty pickup, the engine sputtering to life with a harsh cough before settling into a loud, unrefined rumble. It was the exact opposite of the silent, smooth luxury he was used to, and it felt perfect. As Alexander Sterling drove out of Manhattan, watching the glittering skyline fade in his rearview mirror, he wasn't a billionaire running away. He was a broken man, driving into the quiet, unknown darkness, desperate to find out if there was anything left of his soul beneath the gold-plated armor. He was heading to Willow Creek. Morning in Willow Creek did not arrive with the gentle programmed hum of smart blinds rising to reveal a skyline. It arrived with a violent, ear-splitting shriek. Alexander Sterling jolted awake, his heart pounding against his ribs as if he were late for a hostile takeover. He threw off the scratchy, moth-eaten quilt and scanned the dimly lit room. It took his sleep-addled brain a few seconds to process the peeling floral wallpaper, the drafty wooden floorboards, and the absolute absence of Manhattan. Outside the cracked window, a large, aggressive-looking rooster was standing on a rusted tractor tire, puffing its chest and preparing for another vocal assault. Alex rubbed his face, letting out a long, exhausted exhale. His bed, if one could call the lumpy, squeaking mattress, a bed felt like it had been stuffed with gravel. In New York, he spent thousands on orthopedic, temperature-regulated sleep systems. Here, he was at the mercy of 50-year-old springs. He stood up, his joints popping, and walked over to the small, fogged mirror hanging above a porcelain sink. The man staring back at him didn't look like the CEO of Sterling Global. He had a faint shadow of stubble, dark circles under his steely gray eyes, and his hair, usually styled to perfection, fell haphazardly across his forehead. Strangely, he didn't hate the reflection. He looked tired, yes, but for the first time in a year, he didn't look hollow. "All right," Alex muttered to himself, turning on the tap. The pipes groaned in protest before spitting out freezing cold water. Let's see if I remember how to be a human being. An hour later, Alex was standing in the overgrown fields behind his late grandfather's farmhouse. The property had been abandoned for almost a decade. Weeds the size of small trees choked the soil. The wooden fences were rotting and leaning dangerously, and the barn looked one strong gust of wind away from collapsing. It was a chaotic, overgrown mess. He had found an old, heavy scythe in the rusted tool shed. In theory, it looked simple enough. You swing it, and the grass cuts. Physics, mechanics, something he understood perfectly on a spreadsheet. He gripped the wooden handle, planted his boots firmly in the dirt, and took a massive, powerful swing. Thwack! The blade missed the tall grass entirely, embedding itself a solid 3 inches into a rotted tree stump hidden in the brush. The impact sent a jarring shockwave up Alex's arms, rattling his teeth. He grunted, pulling at the handle. It didn't budge. He planted his foot against the stump and yanked with all his strength. The scythe popped loose so suddenly that Alex stumbled backward, landing flat on his backside in the dirt. He sat there for a moment, staring at the sky, breathing heavily. His tailored muscles, built in a climate-controlled private gym with a personal trainer, were entirely useless against the raw, unyielding resistance of nature. His palms, usually accustomed to silk ties, and Mont Blanc pens were already forming angry red blisters. If the board of directors could see me now, he whispered to the wind, a dry, self-deprecating chuckle escaping his lips. Suddenly, a voice pierced the morning air. Not a rooster this time, but a bright, clear, and slightly off-key melody. Alex scrambled to his feet, dusting off his worn denim jeans. He walked toward the edge of the property where a narrow dirt path bordered his land. Coming down the path was a woman. She was pushing a heavily loaded wooden wheelbarrow, humming a lively country tune that seemed entirely at odds with the physical labor she was performing. She wore faded grass-stained denim overalls over a simple white t-shirt. A worn canvas baseball cap pulled low over her face shielded her eyes from the morning sun, but couldn't hide the cascade of unruly, sun-kissed chestnut curls that spilled over her shoulders. She wasn't delicate or polished like the women Alex was used to. There were no designer labels, no perfect contouring, no calculated elegance. She looked real. She looked like hard work and sunshine. As she drew closer, the wheelbarrow hit a deep rut in the muddy path. It lurched violently to the side. "Whoa! Hey, no, no, no!" the woman gasped. She tried to counter the weight, her work boots sliding in the slick, rain-soaked mud from the night before. But gravity was an unforgiving master. The wheelbarrow tipped, and she lost her footing entirely, her arms flailing as she began to fall backward into a particularly deep, nasty puddle of mud. Instinct overrode logic. Alex dropped the scythe, vaulted over the low, rotting fence with surprising agility, and sprinted toward her. "I've got you!" he shouted. He lunged, catching her firmly by the waist just inches before her back could hit the mud. The momentum spun them around, and for a split second time seemed to freeze. She was clutched tightly against his chest. He could smell the scent of vanilla-fresh earth and crushed basil clinging to her skin. Her hands, rough and calloused, had instinctively grabbed his shoulders to brace herself. She opened her eyes, and Alex felt his breath catch. They were the most striking shade of blue he had ever seen, like the clear summer sky over the Atlantic. Wide and startled, they stared up into his stormy gray ones. It was the quintessential romantic movie moment. A rugged stranger, a beautiful local, a heroic rescue. The air crackled with a sudden, undeniable tension. And then a loud squelching splat ruined it. The wheelbarrow had overturned completely, sending dozens of bright red, perfectly ripe tomatoes tumbling into the muddy water. The spell was broken instantly. The woman's large blue eyes shifted from Alex's face to the fallen produce. A look of sheer, unadulterated horror crossed her features. "My tomatoes!" she shrieked, scrambling out of his arms so fast she nearly pushed him into the mud instead. Alex blinked, stumbling slightly. You're welcome, welcome." She dropped to her knees in the dirt, frantically scooping up the bruised red fruit. "Do you know how long it took me to grow these? These were supposed to pay for my electricity bill this month. Oh, heavens, look at them. They're bruised. They're muddy. Chloe is going to have a field day at the farmer's market." Alex stood there thoroughly bewildered. In his world, if a woman fell and he caught her, she would bat her eyelashes, thank him profusely, and probably ask for his business card. This woman was grieving over a pile of vegetables, as if she had just lost a multi-million-dollar contract. "They're just tomatoes," Alex said softly, trying to be rational. "I can write you a check for the damages." She snapped her head up, her eyes flashing with a fiery indignation that made Alex take a tiny step back. Just tomatoes, listen here, Mr. Lumberjack. I woke up at 4 a.m. to harvest these. And who even are you? You just come flying out of the bushes like some kind of feral superhero, scaring the daylights out of me and causing me to lose my balance." "You were already falling," Alex pointed out, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "If I hadn't caught you, you'd be covered in mud right now." She looked down at her mud-splattered boots and the hem of her overalls, then back at the ruined tomatoes, weighing the options. She let out a long, frustrated sigh, pushing her cap back on her head. "Fine. You kept me out of the mud. Thank you. I guess my dignity is slightly intact, even if my inventory is ruined." She stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans, and gave him a thorough calculating once-over. Her gaze swept over his expensive, albeit dirty boots, the high-end flannel shirt that was far too clean to belong to a real farmer, and the blisters forming on his hands. "You're old man Arthur's grandson, aren't you?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "The one from the city?" "Alexander," he said, extending a hand before realizing how ridiculous it was. He lowered it. "Yes, I'm Alex." "Daisy?" she replied. "Daisy Monroe. And you, Alex, look like you're about to lose a fight with a patch of crabgrass." She gestured toward the property behind him, where the scythe was still comically stuck in the stump. Alex felt a strange prickle of embarrassment. "I was just surveying the land." "Right. Surveying." Daisy snorted a genuine melodious sound that made Alex's chest feel oddly warm. "Is that what they call swinging a scythe like a blindfolded man at a piñata party in the city?" Alex couldn't help it. A bark of laughter escaped his throat. It was loud, rich, and echoed across the empty field. It was the first time he had laughed genuinely in months. He wasn't offended. He was utterly charmed by her lack of pretense. She didn't know he was Alexander Sterling, the billionaire titan. To her, he was just a clueless city boy who couldn't handle a garden tool. "Fair enough, Daisy Monroe." Alex smiled a rare, breathtaking smile that reached his eyes. "I admit farming is not my area of expertise. My grandfather made it look much easier." Daisy's expression softened slightly at the mention of his grandfather. "Arthur was a good man, the hardest worker in Willow Creek. It's a shame the place has gone to ruin." She looked at the few tomatoes that survived the fall and carefully placed them back in the wheelbarrow. Alex knelt beside her, picking up a few unbruised ones and wiping the dirt off on his sleeve before handing them to her. I'm sorry about the electricity bill. Really, let me compensate you. Daisy looked at the tomato in his hand, then up at his face. For a moment, the fiery banter faded, replaced by a quiet, observant stillness. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the tightness in his jaw that hinted at a burden much heavier than farm work. I don't take charity, city boy, she said softly, but without malice. I earn what I have, but... She took the tomato from him, her fingers brushing against his blistered palm. She winced slightly at the sight of his hands. If you want to make it up to me, you can buy me a cup of coffee at the diner tomorrow. And maybe I'll show you how to hold that scythe so you don't chop off your own foot. Alex looked down at his ruined hands, then back at the beautiful, stubborn woman standing in the muddy dirt path. He thought about Vanessa, about the empty penthouse, about the boardroom sharks circling his empire. None of it felt real anymore. This, the smell of the earth, the sting of his hands, the bright blue eyes of Daisy Monroe, this felt real. Coffee sounds perfect, Alex said softly. Daisy offered him a small, radiant smile that hit him harder than a right hook. She grabbed the handles of her wheelbarrow, righted it, and began pushing it down the path again. 7 a.m., Alex. Don't be late. We work on rural time here. I'll be there, he called after her. Alexander stood by the broken fence, watching her figure disappear down the winding dirt road. The morning sun was fully up now, casting a golden glow over the overgrown fields of his grandfather's farm. He looked down at the mud on his boots and the blisters on his hands. He was exhausted, aching, and completely out of his element. Yet as the sound of Daisy's humming faded into the distance, Alexander Sterling realized something terrifyingly wonderful. He didn't want to go back to New York. Not today, and maybe not ever. The Bellflower Diner was the undisputed epicenter of Willow Creek. It was the kind of place where the coffee was strong enough to strip paint. The vinyl booths were patched with silver duct tape, and gossip was served hotter and faster than the pancakes. If you wanted to know whose tractor broke down, who was secretly dating whom, or who was facing foreclosure, you just had to sit at the counter for 10 minutes. At exactly 6:55 a.m., Alexander pushed open the heavy glass door. The bell above it chimed cheerfully, announcing his arrival to a room full of locals. He wore the same denim jeans from yesterday, now washed but permanently stained at the knees, and a simple gray Henley shirt. The blisters on his hands were bandaged clumsily, a testament to his lack of practical first aid skills without a concierge doctor on speed dial. He scanned the room and instantly spotted her. Daisy was sitting in a corner booth, bathed in the soft morning light filtering through the window. She had her hair tied back in a messy bun, a stray curl falling across her forehead as she scribbled fiercely into a small, worn notebook. She looked up, caught his eye, and that same brilliant, breath-stealing smile from yesterday broke across her face. Alex felt his chest tighten. In New York, smiles were strategic. Here, Daisy's smile was just for him. "You're early city boy," she said as he slid into the booth opposite her. She tapped her pen against the table. "I figured you for the type to sleep until noon and demand breakfast in bed. I'll have you know I've been up since 5. Alex replied, a defensive but amused edge to his voice. "Though, to be fair, the rooster gave me no choice. I'm considering turning him into soup." Daisy laughed a warm sound that made a few heads turn in the diner. "Don't you dare touch General Cluck. He's a local legend. Besides, you wouldn't know how to pluck a chicken if it came with an instruction manual." True, Alex conceded, accepting a mug of pitch-black coffee from a passing waitress. He took a sip and nearly winced at the bitterness, but forced it down. So what are you calculating with such intensity? Daisy's smile faltered slightly, a shadow passing over her bright blue eyes. She closed the notebook, but not before Alex caught a glimpse of columns of numbers and the word overdue circled in red ink at the top of the page. Just farm math, she said evasively. Figuring out how many carrots I need to sell to make up for yesterday's tomato massacre. Before Alex could offer to help, to casually mention that he could write a check to buy every carrot in the state, a loud grating voice cut through the diner's ambient chatter. Well, well, well. If it isn't Daisy Monroe and the ghost of Arthur's ruined farm. Alex looked up. Standing by their booth was a man in his late 20s, sporting a brand new stiff flannel shirt, immaculate cowboy boots that had clearly never seen a day of actual mud, and a smirk that made Alex want to introduce his fist to the man's jaw. Clinging to his arm was a woman with heavily bleached blonde hair carrying a counterfeit designer handbag she was trying very hard to display. "Morning, Brad. Chloe," Daisy said, her tone instantly dropping 10 degrees. She stiffened her shoulders, squaring defensively. Brad sneered his eyes, raking over Alex with undisguised contempt. "We heard someone finally moved into the old Sterling place. Didn't expect it to be Arthur's useless grandson. What happened, city boy? Run out of trust fund money. Finally got kicked out of whatever fancy college you were failing out of. In his past life, Alex would have destroyed a man like Brad with a single phone call. He would have bought Brad's bank, foreclosed his properties, and had him blacklisted from every agricultural supplier in the tri-state area before lunchtime. But here, without his tailored suit and his executive title, he was just a guy with bandaged hands and dirt on his shoes. Alex took a slow, deliberate sip of his coffee. He looked Brad dead in the eye, his gaze cold and flat, the same gaze that made Wall Street veterans sweat. "And you were—" Brad's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second under the sheer unexpected weight of Alex's stare, but he quickly recovered, puffing out his chest. "I'm Brad Higgins. My family owns the biggest supply store in the county. We actually work for a living, unlike some people." He gestured vaguely at Alex's bandaged hands. "Looks like you can't even hold a shovel without crying for a Band-Aid. That farm is going to rot to the ground with you in charge." Chloe giggled a high-pitched nasal sound. "Honestly, Daisy, is this your new charity project? You're already broke. You don't need to drag yourself down further by hanging out with a homeless farmer. You know, Brad could get you a job at the store, sweeping floors or something. You don't have to scrape the bottom of the barrel." The air in the diner grew thick. A few patrons at nearby tables fell silent, watching the exchange. Alex felt a surge of cold fury, not for himself, but for the casual, vicious way they belittled Daisy. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash a verbal evisceration that would leave Brad and Chloe in tears. But before he could say a word, Daisy stood up. She wasn't a tall woman, but at that moment she looked 10 feet tall. Her blue eyes blazed with an absolute, unyielding fire. She didn't look at Alex. She locked her gaze entirely on Brad. "Listen to me very carefully, Brad," Daisy said, her voice eerily calm, but vibrating with anger. "Alex might not know how to farm yet, but at least he's out there trying with his own 2 hands. He isn't living off his daddy's credit card like you are. He's got more integrity in his blistered pinky finger than you have in your entire overpriced truck. Brad flushed red, stepping back slightly. Daisy, I was just... And as for you, Chloe? Daisy turned her fierce gaze to the blonde woman, who instantly stopped giggling. If I wanted advice on scraping the bottom of the barrel, I'd ask you considering the company you keep. A low chorus of oohs rippled through the nearby booths. Chloe's mouth dropped open in shock, her face turning a mottled shade of pink. You're making a mistake, Daisy, Brad snarled, trying to regain his footing. When your little farm goes under this winter, don't come begging to my family for a loan. And when this city boy gets tired of playing in the mud and runs away, you'll be the one left with nothing. I'd rather have nothing, Daisy shot back, her chin raised proudly, than owe you anything. Now get away from our table. You're ruining my coffee. Fuming and embarrassed in front of the local crowd, Brad grabbed Chloe's arm and stormed out of the diner, the bell clanging aggressively behind them. Silence lingered in the diner for a moment before the ambient chatter slowly resumed. Daisy let out a shaky breath and slid back into the booth, rubbing her temples. I'm sorry about that, she muttered, not meeting Alex's eyes. Brad has had a superiority complex since he won a ribbon for a giant pumpkin in the 5th grade. Alex sat frozen. Throughout his entire life, people had defended him because he signed their paychecks. Lawyers defended him for retainers. Vanessa defended him to secure her social standing. But Daisy thought he was a penniless, failed grandson with a rotting farm. She had absolutely nothing to gain from protecting him, and yet she had thrown herself in front of the town bullies without a second thought. He stared at her, overwhelmed by a feeling so profound it physically ached in his chest. It was respect. It was awe. It was the terrifying realization that he was falling rapidly, hopelessly in love with her. You didn't have to do that, Alex said softly, his voice thick with emotion. I could have handled him. Daisy looked up, offering a small, fierce smile. Nobody comes to my town and bullies my friends, even if my friend is a city boy who can't swing a scythe. Asterisk, my friend. The words echoed in Alex's mind. It wasn't my billionaire or my ticket out of here. It was just him. Thank you, Daisy, he said, and he meant it more than he had ever meant anything in his life. Later that morning, Alex insisted on accompanying Daisy to the local farmer's market. After the disaster with the tomatoes, she only had a few baskets of bell peppers, some jars of homemade honey, and a crate of zucchini. The market was a small, dusty affair set up in the town square. Brad and Chloe were conspicuously absent, much to Daisy's relief. As they set up her small wooden stall, Alex noticed that Daisy was a terrible salesperson. She was too polite, too shy to call out to the passing customers, and often let people haggle her already rock-bottom prices down to pennies. The CEO inside Alexander Sterling couldn't take it anymore. Daisy, step aside, Alex commanded, gently rolling up his flannel sleeves. What, Alex? What are you doing? She asked, confused. Selling your stock, he replied smoothly. He stepped to the front of the table. He didn't yell like a carnival barker. Instead, he utilized the quiet, authoritative charisma that had convinced international boards to hand over their companies. When a middle-aged woman approached to look at the honey, Alex leaned in. I wouldn't wait on that, ma'am. That's the last batch of the season from the Monroe farm. The floral notes are exceptionally rare this year due to the late spring rain. Once these 3 jars are gone, you won't taste anything like it until next year. The woman blinked, mesmerized by his smooth delivery. Oh, well, I should probably take 2 then. A wise investment, Alex smiled, bagging them up. Daisy watched in stunned silence. Over the next hour, Alex completely transformed her humble stall. He rearranged the vegetables to create visual scarcity, bundled the less popular zucchinis with the bright bell peppers for a premium weekend stew package, and politely but firmly refused any haggling convincing the buyers that they were paying for unparalleled organic quality. By noon, every single item was sold out. The wooden table was bare, and Daisy's cash box was overflowing with crisp bills, more money than she usually made in 3 weeks. She stood staring at the cash box, her mouth slightly open. She looked up at Alex, who was leaning casually against the back of the stall, looking extremely pleased with himself. Who are you?" Daisy asked, her voice a mix of bewilderment and awe. "You can't even hold a farming tool properly, but you just sweet-talked Mrs. Gable into buying 10 zucchinis she didn't even want." Alex chuckled, stepping closer to her. "I told you I'm just a guy from the city trying to figure things out. I might not know how to grow the food, Daisy, but I know how to sell a product." Daisy looked at the money, then at him. The mockery of the town, the threats from Brad, they all faded away. In that bustling, dusty market square, surrounded by the simple folk of Willow Creek, Daisy felt a deep, anchoring safety she hadn't felt in years. "You're a very confusing man, Alexander," she whispered, looking up into his stormy gray eyes. Alex smiled softly, reaching out to gently tuck a stray chestnut curl behind her ear. His fingers lingered for a fraction of a second against her warm skin. "I'm an open book, Daisy. You just have to read me." As they packed up the empty stall, Alex made a silent vow. The people of this town could laugh at him all they wanted. They could call him poor, useless, and a failure. He didn't care. As long as Daisy looked at him the way she was looking at him right now. Alexander Sterling, the billionaire king of Manhattan, was the richest man in the world. As summer bled into early autumn, the rhythm of life in Willow Creek fundamentally changed Alexander Sterling. The man who once dictated global market trends from a sterile, climate-controlled boardroom now found his peace in the unpredictable, sun-drenched dirt of his grandfather's farm. His hands were no longer soft and blistered. They were calloused and stained with earth. He still couldn't fix a tractor engine to save his life, and his attempts at mending the roof were comical, but he was trying. More importantly, he was spending every spare moment with Daisy. They became inseparable. Alex helped her haul crates of produce to the market, using his silver-tongued negotiation skills to ensure she never sold a single pepper for less than it was worth. In return, Daisy taught him how to tell when rain was coming just by smelling the wind, and how to make a stew out of bruised vegetables that tasted better than any Michelin-starred meal Alex had ever eaten in Manhattan. But as the days grew shorter and the air turned crisp, a dark cloud began to settle over Daisy. Alex saw it in the way she stared blankly at her ledger book late at night on her porch, the way her shoulders slumped when she thought he wasn't looking. The harvest had been poor due to an unseasonable frost, and the mounting bills were threatening to swallow her small farm whole. One brisk Tuesday afternoon, Alex was attempting to chop firewood near Daisy's barn when a shiny, oversized black truck rolled up her gravel driveway. Brad Higgins stepped out wearing his trademark smirk and a leather jacket that looked like it had never seen a day of actual weather. Alex immediately buried the axe into the chopping block and wiped the sweat from his brow, his jaw clenching. He walked toward the porch just as Daisy stepped out of her front door, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Brad, Daisy," said her voice flat, devoid of any welcome. "What do you want?" Brad leaned against the porch railing, looking around the modest property with an air of theatrical pity. "Just being a good neighbor, Daisy. I heard about the frost. Heard the bank is getting restless about your mortgage." Daisy stiffened, her blue eyes flashing defensively. "My finances are none of your business." "They are when my family's bank holds the deed to this place," Brad countered smoothly, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Look, Daisy, you're drowning. This farm is a sinking ship. But it doesn't have to be. My father is willing to restructure your loan. Favorable terms. All you have to do is agree to have dinner with me. Give us a real chance. You know I can take care of you." Alex stepped onto the porch, his presence instantly altering the gravity of the space. He didn't say a word, but he didn't have to. The sheer imposing authority radiating from him made Brad instinctively take a half step back. "Oh, Brad," Alex said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that sounded entirely out of place on a rural farmhouse porch. "I believe the lady told you her finances are none of your business." Brad sneered, recovering his bravado. "Stay out of this city, boy. You can't even afford to fix your own grandfather's roof. What are you going to do to help her pay her mortgage with good intentions and dirt? She needs a real man with real money, not a charity case." Daisy stepped forward, placing herself between them. "I would rather lose this farm and live in a tent than owe you a single dime, Brad Higgins. Get off my property. Now." Brad's face darkened with ugly, humiliated rage. He pointed a finger at Daisy. "You're making a massive mistake. When the bank forecloses next month, don't come crying to me. You and your worthless boyfriend are going to end up with absolutely nothing." He turned on his heel, stomped back to his truck, and sped off, kicking up a cloud of angry gravel. Silence descended on the porch. Daisy stood perfectly still for a moment, and then slowly her shoulders began to shake. She sank onto the wooden steps, burying her face in her hands. A single frustrated sob escaped her lips. Alex felt his heart shatter. The billionaire inside him screamed to pull out his phone call, his wealth manager, and buy the Higgins family bank, just so he could fire Brad's father and hand the deed to Daisy. It would take one phone call, 60 seconds to solve all her problems. But as he looked at her, he hesitated. He remembered Vanessa. He remembered the women in New York who looked at him and only saw a walking ATM machine. Daisy was fiercely independent. Her pride was tied to this land. If he swooped in and threw millions of dollars at her, he wouldn't be saving her. He would be buying her. And worse, he would shatter the fragile, beautiful reality they had built. He needed her to love Alexander Asterisk, not the CEO. And he needed to know for the sake of his own bruised soul that someone could love him when he had absolutely nothing to offer but himself. Alex sat down on the steps beside her, gently pulling her hands away from her tear-streaked face. "Daisy, look at me," she sniffled, refusing to meet his eyes. "He's right, Alex. I'm losing it. I'm losing the farm. I have nothing." "You have me," Alex said fiercely. Daisy finally looked up, offering a sad, broken smile. "And what do we have? Alex, 2 ruined farms and empty pockets. It's not enough to survive." "It's enough to start," Alex replied softly. He reached out his thumb, brushing a tear from her cheek. "When I came to this town, I was empty. I was running away from a life that looked perfect on paper but felt entirely dead. You brought me back to life, Daisy. You defended me when you thought I was a joke. You fed me. You laughed with me. You looked at me like I actually mattered. Daisy's breath hitched. The raw vulnerability in his eyes was staggering. Alex slowly reached into the pocket of his denim jacket. While sitting under the large oak tree earlier that afternoon, he had carefully, meticulously woven several long, vibrant green blades of sweetgrass together. It was a fragile, simple thing, knotted tightly in the center. He pulled it out and held it between his calloused fingers. "I don't have a diamond ring," Alex said, his voice dropping to a tender, intimate whisper. "I don't have a fancy title to offer you, or a sports car, or a mansion. Right now, I can't even promise you that the roof won't leak when it rains." Daisy stared at the small braided leaf ring, her lips parting in shock. "But I can promise you this." Alex continued, his steely gray eyes locked onto hers with unwavering intensity. "I will protect you. I will honor you. I will wake up every single day and choose you over everything else in this world. I am offering you my heart completely and unconditionally. Marry me, Daisy Monroe." The world seemed to stop spinning. The wind died down. There was only the sound of Daisy's rapid breathing and the overwhelming, terrifying depth of love in Alex's eyes. She looked at the leaf ring. It wasn't gold. It wasn't platinum. It would eventually dry out and fade. But the man holding it was a fortress. He was the safest place she had ever known. Tears. This time, tears of overwhelming joy spilled over her eyelashes. She didn't hesitate. She didn't think about the bank or the harvest. "Yes," Daisy whispered, her voice cracking. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his chest. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." Alex let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for decades. He wrapped his arms around her tightly, burying his face in her chestnut hair, feeling a surge of absolute, triumphant victory. He had won the greatest negotiation of his life, and he hadn't spent a single penny. He gently pulled back and slipped the woven grass ring onto her left ring finger. It fit perfectly. Daisy looked down at it, touching the green braids with profound reverence, a radiant smile illuminating her face. Of course, in a town as small as Willow Creek, a secret like an engagement was impossible to keep. By the next afternoon, the entire town knew. Daisy had gone into the local general store to buy flour, humming happily, the leaf ring resting proudly on her finger. She was at the checkout counter when Chloe walked in, followed closely by 3 of her equally judgmental friends. Chloe's eyes immediately locked onto Daisy's left hand. She stopped dead in her tracks, letting out a sharp theatrical gasp that drew the attention of everyone in the store. "Oh my heavens!" Chloe shrieked, covering her mouth in mock horror. "Daisy Monroe, is that grass on your finger?" The cashier paused. The older women browsing the produce aisle turned around. Daisy straightened her spine, refusing to hide her hand. "It's an engagement ring, Chloe." A beat of stunned silence swept through the store, followed immediately by a chorus of vicious, echoing laughter. Chloe laughed so hard she had to lean against a display rack. "An engagement ring," Chloe gasped, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "You're marrying the useless city boy, and he couldn't even afford a $20 pawn shop cubic zirconia. He went into his yard and picked weeds for you." One of Chloe's friends snickered loudly. I guess when you're marrying a penniless failure, you have to settle for landscaping debris. This is tragic, Daisy, truly, Chloe added, shaking her head with venomous delight. Brad offered to save your farm, and instead you're tying yourself to a man who literally has nothing. What are you going to serve at the wedding? Mud pies. Are you going to register for a new set of gardening hose? The laughter in the store grew louder, suffocating and cruel. A few people looked at Daisy with genuine pity, which somehow felt worse than the mockery. Daisy felt a hot flush of anger rise to her cheeks, but she didn't break. She looked down at the woven grass ring, remembering the look in Alex's eyes when he gave it to her. She looked back up at Chloe, her blue eyes icy and unbothered. You can laugh all you want, Chloe, Daisy said, her voice carrying clearly across the quieted store. You judge a man by what he can buy you. I judge a man by who he is. Alexander has more character, more loyalty, and more love in his heart than any man in this town. I am proud to wear this ring, and I am proud to be his wife. She picked up her bag of flour, paid the cashier, and walked out the door with her head held high, leaving Chloe momentarily speechless. Standing just outside the store, hidden from view, Alex had heard everything. He had followed Daisy into town, wanting to surprise her with a walk home. Instead, he had listened as the town tore into the woman he loved, mocking her poverty, mocking his supposed failure, trying to strip her of her dignity. His fists clenched at his sides so tightly, his knuckles turned white. The blood roared in his ears. The humble farmer persona faded, and the ruthless, untouchable CEO of Sterling Global woke up cold and calculating. He watched Daisy walk down the street, her small shoulders braced against the judgment of the town. She had defended him again. She had chosen his poverty over comfort. She had passed the ultimate test with flying colors. Alex pulled his phone out of his pocket, the phone he had kept powered off for months. He held the power button down. The screen glowed to life, instantly flooding with thousands of missed calls, urgent emails, and panicked voicemails. He dialed one number. It rang precisely half a time before it was answered. Mr. Sterling. Harrison's voice was breathless, bordering on frantic. Sir, thank God. The board is in a panic. The European merger is stalled, and Vanessa has been calling my office every day demanding to know. Harrison, Alex interrupted, his voice an absolute glacier of authority. Cancel all of that. None of it matters. Sir, what do you need? Alex stared down the dusty street of Willow Creek, a dark, triumphant smirk playing on his lips. I need you to prepare the fleet. SUVs, the security detail, and the corporate helicopter. And Harrison. Yes, Mr. Sterling. Contact Tiffany and Company. Have them open the vault. I need a ring. Something that will make a town full of miserable, arrogant fools swallow their tongues. I'm getting married. The day of the wedding was crisp and bright, the kind of flawless autumn Saturday that made the golden leaves of Willow Creek look like they were glowing from the inside out. The ceremony was set to take place in the small field right next to Daisy's barn. It was a fiercely humble affair. The seating consisted of mismatched wooden chairs and hay bales draped with old quilts. There were no imported orchids or towering floral arches. Instead, Daisy had decorated the makeshift aisle with wild sunflowers and mason jars filled with fairy lights. It was rustic, inexpensive, and to Daisy, absolutely perfect. But to the town of Willow Creek, it was the social joke of the decade. The townspeople arrived in droves, not to celebrate, but to witness what they considered a spectacular train wreck. They filled the seats, whispering behind their hands, their eyes darting around the modest setup with poorly concealed amusement. In the front row, Brad Higgins sat with his legs crossed, wearing a smirk so wide it looked permanently etched into his face. Next to him, Chloe was actively taking photos on her phone, leaning over to whisper loudly, "I bet they're going to serve tap water and crackers at the reception. Do you think the groom even owns a tie? Or is he getting married in flannel?" Standing at the altar, a simple wooden trellis covered in ivy. Alexander Sterling ignored them all. He was wearing a dark, unbranded suit that he had bought from the local thrift store for $40. It didn't fit perfectly, and the fabric was stiff, but he wore it with the commanding posture of an emperor. His gray eyes were fixed on the back of the field, waiting. He was completely unfazed by the giggles and the pointing. They were laughing at a ghost. Then the rustic wooden doors of the farmhouse opened, and the whispering stopped. Daisy stepped out. She wasn't wearing a designer gown covered in Swarovski crystals. She wore her late mother's vintage lace dress, altered to fit her perfectly. Her chestnut curls cascaded down her shoulders, pinned back with a few delicate sunflowers. She wore no expensive jewelry, only the woven grass ring on her left hand. To Alexander, she was the most breathtaking vision he had ever seen. The air left his lungs. The mockery of the town faded into absolute, irrelevant white noise. She walked down the grassy aisle, her blue eyes locked entirely on his, radiating a quiet, fierce pride. When she reached him, Alex took her hands. They were trembling slightly. "You look beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Daisy smiled, a tear glistening in the corner of her eye. "You clean up nicely yourself, city boy." The elderly town pastor cleared his throat, opening his worn Bible. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Daisy Monroe and Alexander." He paused, squinting at his notes. Just Alexander, in the eyes of God in this community. Before the pastor could get through the opening prayer, a voice interrupted. "Make it quick, Pastor. Some of us have real jobs to get back to," Brad called out from the front row, drawing a wave of snickers from his group of friends. Daisy stiffened, a flash of hurt crossing her face. Alex gently squeezed her hands. "Don't look at them," he whispered softly. "Look at me. Only me." The pastor frowned, but continued rushing slightly through the vows, clearly eager to get the uncomfortable affair over with. "If anyone here knows any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." "Well, for starters, neither of them has a dime to their name," Chloe Stage whispered loudly. "How are they going to pay for a marriage license with eggplants?" Loud laughter erupted from the back rows. Daisy bit her lower lip, staring hard at the grass beneath her feet. The humiliation was heavy, pressing down on her shoulders. Alex let go of Daisy's hands. He didn't look angry. He looked terrifyingly calm. He slowly turned his head to look at Chloe, then at Brad, and finally his gaze swept over the entire laughing crowd. "Are you all quite finished?" Alex's voice wasn't a shout. It was a low, resonant baritone that carried a lethal, absolute authority. It was the voice of a man who commanded thousands of tones so foreign to the dusty fields of Willow Creek that the laughter died instantly. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Just calling it like we see it, pal." "Look closer, Brad," Alex said softly. A low, vibrating hum began to tremble through the ground. It started as a subtle vibration against the soles of their shoes, then rapidly grew into a deep, rhythmic roar. People began to look around, confused. It wasn't the sound of a combine harvester or a local freight truck. It sounded like an earthquake. Then a massive shadow swept over the field, blocking out the autumn sun. The townspeople gasped, looking up. A sleek black corporate helicopter with silver insignia was descending rapidly toward the adjacent empty pasture, its massive rotor blades whipping the tall grass into a frenzy. "What in the world is that?" the pastor stammered, holding onto his hat as the wind kicked up. Before the helicopter even touched down, the sound of heavy tires crunching aggressively on the gravel road drew their attention to the front of the farm. A convoy of 6 identical, heavily armored jet-black Cadillac Escalades rolled down the narrow dirt driveway. They moved in perfect, intimidating synchronization, pulling up right to the edge of the wedding seating. The dust settled, painting a surreal picture against the humble farm backdrop. The town of Willow Creek sat frozen in stunned silence. Chloe's phone slipped from her hand, hitting the grass with a dull thud. Brad's jaw was practically on the floor. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. A dozen men dressed in sharp black suits with earpieces stepped out, fanning out around the perimeter with military precision. From the lead vehicle, an older man in a bespoke 3-piece suit stepped out carrying a sleek leather briefcase and a small velvet box. It was Harrison. He walked past the gaping townspeople, his expression perfectly neutral, until he reached the altar. He stopped, bowed his head slightly, and extended the velvet box. "Mr. Sterling," Harrison said, his voice crisp and clear. "My deepest apologies for the interruption. The airspace clearance took slightly longer than anticipated. Everything you requested is prepared." The name dropped like a bomb in the silent field. Asterisk Sterling. Asterisk. In the third row, Brad's father, the owner of the local bank, suddenly turned a terrifying shade of gray. He stood up, his knees shaking. Alexander Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Global. The whispers exploded like a wildfire. Asterisk Billionaire. The Sterling Empire. Wall Street. Alex didn't look at the crowd. He took the velvet box from Harrison and turned his attention entirely to the woman standing in front of him. Daisy was staring at him, her blue eyes wide as saucers, her chest rising and falling rapidly. "Alex, what is this? What is happening?" Alex smiled, the cold authority vanishing from his face, replaced by a profound, overwhelming tenderness. He reached out and gently cupped her cheek. "I told you I was a man from the city," Alex said softly. "I told you I didn't know how to farm, but I never told you I was poor Daisy. I came here to hide, to escape a world of people who only loved me for what I owned." He opened the velvet box. Inside rested a diamond ring, so spectacular, so flawlessly cut, that it seemed to capture the sunlight and trap it inside. It was worth more than the entire town of Willow Creek combined. "You defended me when you thought I had nothing," Alex whispered, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. "You chose a man with blistered hands and empty pockets over a life of comfort. You loved me when I was just Alexander." He reached for her left hand, gently touching the woven grass ring. "I am Alexander Sterling. I own companies, properties, and bank accounts all over the world. But none of it means a damn thing without you." He didn't remove the leaf ring. Instead, he slid the massive glittering diamond ring onto her finger, right perfectly beside the woven grass. "I told you I would protect you," Alex said, his eyes locking onto hers. Let me show you how." He finally turned to face the crowd. The terrifying CEO was fully awake now. His eyes found Brad Higgins, who was currently shrinking into his chair, looking as if he wanted the earth to open up and swallow him whole. Brad Alex's voice cut through the air like a silver blade. "You mentioned yesterday that my wife's farm was a sinking ship. You threatened her with foreclosure because your family's bank holds the deed." Alex snapped his fingers. Harrison immediately stepped forward, opening the leather briefcase and pulling out a stack of crisp, watermarked documents. "Harrison, what is the current status of the Higgins County Bank?" Alex asked smoothly. "Acquired, sir," Harrison replied loudly. "Sterling Global finalized the hostile takeover of their parent company 30 minutes ago. You are now the majority shareholder of the bank, the land it sits on, and every debt it holds." Brad's father let out a choked gasp, dropping back into his seat. "Which means," Alex continued, his eyes drilling into Brad, "I own your bank. I own this town's agricultural supply chain. And as of this morning, Daisy's mortgage has been paid in full, and the deed is in her name alone." Brad opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The smug, arrogant bully had been utterly annihilated, stripped of his power in less than 2 minutes. Alex turned his gaze to Chloe, who was hyperventilating, trying to hide behind her counterfeit handbag. "And Chloe, you were worried about what we would serve at the reception." Alex nodded toward the helicopter. 2 executive chefs in pristine white coats were already stepping out, directing a team of caterers who were unloading crates of champagne caviar and Wagyu beef. "We'll be fine," Alex said coldly, "though I'm afraid you and Brad are no longer on the guest list. Harrison, show them out." 2 towering security guards in black suits stepped immediately up to Brad and Chloe, gesturing toward the dirt road. Humiliated, terrified, and utterly defeated, the 2 local bullies scrambled out of their seats and practically ran away, followed by the stunned silence of the rest of the town. The bullies were gone. The debt was erased. The mockery was dead. Alex turned back to the pastor, who was sweating profusely, gripping his Bible like a lifeline. "I believe you were at the part about pronouncing us husband and wife." The pastor swallowed hard, his voice trembling. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alex wrapped his arms around Daisy's waist, pulling her flush against him. She looked up at him, a mixture of shock, awe, and overwhelming love in her bright blue eyes. "You're crazy," she whispered, her hands resting against his chest. "You bought a bank for me. I would buy the world for you, Mrs. Sterling," Alex murmured. He leaned down and kissed her, capturing her lips with a fierce, possessive passion. The crowd, finally recovering from their collective shock, erupted into genuine, thunderous applause. The poor farmer with the ruined hands was gone. The Undercover CEO had claimed his queen, and nothing in Willow Creek or the world would ever be the same again. The transition from the dusty, sun-baked fields of Willow Creek to the dizzying heights of the Sterling Penthouse in Manhattan was nothing short of cinematic. Daisy stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master suite, wrapped in a plush silk robe that probably cost more than her first tractor. Below her, the glittering expanse of New York City stretched out like an endless ocean of diamonds. It was beautiful, overwhelming, and entirely foreign. Yet, as Alexander stepped up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder, the sprawling metropolis didn't feel so intimidating anymore. "Still getting used to the view," Alex murmured, pressing a soft kiss to her temple. Daisy leaned back against his solid chest, her fingers tracing the woven grass ring that still sat proudly next to the massive, flawless diamond on her left hand. She had refused to take it off. To her, the grass ring was the real foundation of their marriage. The diamond was just a beautiful bonus. "It's incredible," she whispered. "But if I'm being entirely honest, city boy, I miss the sound of the crickets, and maybe even General Cluck screaming at 5 in the morning." Alex chuckled a deep resonant sound that vibrated against her back. "I've already had Harrison dispatch a team of architects to Willow Creek. We're rebuilding the farmhouse. Top to bottom, maintaining the rustic charm, but ensuring the roof actually keeps the rain out this time. We'll split our time. Half the year, running the empire, half the year, playing in the mud." Daisy turned in his arms, her eyes shining with absolute adoration. "You would do that for me, Daisy?" Alex said, his steely gray eyes turning incredibly soft. "I would burn this city to the ground if you asked me to. Rebuilding a farmhouse is the least I can do." Before she could pull him down for a kiss, the intercom on the mahogany wall chimed softly. "Mr. Sterling?" Harrison's voice came through, sounding unusually strained. "I apologize for the intrusion, sir, but there is a situation in the private lobby." Alex frowned, his protective instincts instantly flaring. "What kind of situation, Harrison? The private elevator requires a biometric scan. It's Miss Kensington, sir. Vanessa. She managed to slip past the ground floor security detail by tagging along with one of the board members. She is currently demanding to see you and making quite a scene. Should I have security escort her off the premises physically?" Daisy felt a slight tightening in her chest. Vanessa, the woman who had broken Alex's heart, the woman who had chosen a rival banker's wealth over Alex's love. Alex's jaw clenched, his eyes hardening into the cold, ruthless gaze of the CEO. "Yes, Harrison, throw her out and fire the ground floor security chief." "Wait," Daisy said softly, placing a hand on Alex's chest. Alex looked down at her, confused. "Daisy, you don't need to deal with her. She's toxic waste." "I know," Daisy replied, lifting her chin with a quiet, undeniable regal grace. "But she needs to see that you didn't just move on. She needs to see that you won. Let her up." Alex stared at his wife, all washing over him. He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Send her up, Harrison, but have security standing by." 2 minutes later, the polished silver doors of the private elevator slid open with a soft ping. Vanessa stumbled out. The polished, flawless socialite was gone. Her designer dress was wrinkled, her makeup was smudged under her eyes, and she looked desperately thin and frantic. Julian Thorne, the man she had betrayed Alex for, had been utterly destroyed by Alex's retaliatory market moves over the last few months. His funds were frozen, his reputation ruined, and Vanessa had been dragged down with his sinking ship. She looked up, tears already forming in her eyes. "Alex, Alex, please, you have to help me." She stopped dead. Standing in the center of the grand foyer was Alexander, looking more powerful and untouchable than ever. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, radiating a natural, effortless beauty that no amount of plastic surgery or expensive cosmetics could buy, was Daisy. Vanessa's eyes darted between them, landing on the massive diamond glittering on Daisy's finger. A flash of ugly, bitter disbelief twisted her face. "Who is this?" Vanessa sneered, her old arrogance desperately trying to surface. "Is this some kind of joke?" Alex, I heard rumors you married some uneducated dirt farmer to get back at me. But I didn't think you'd actually bring a peasant into your penthouse." The temperature in the room plummeted. Alex took a menacing step forward, but Daisy gently held him back. She didn't look angry. She didn't look intimidated. She looked at Vanessa the exact same way she looked at the bruised tomatoes that had fallen in the mud, with mild, indifferent pity. "Hello, Vanessa," Daisy said calmly, her voice carrying a steady authority that echoed beautifully in the marble room. "I'm Daisy Sterling, and I believe you are trespassing in my home." Vanessa let out a harsh, hysterical laugh. "Your home. You're a nobody. You're a country bumpkin who got lucky because he was heartbroken. Alex, look at me." She turned to him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Julian is bankrupt. I have nothing. I made a mistake. I belong here with you. Not this." Alex looked at Vanessa, feeling absolutely nothing. No anger, no sadness, no lingering affection. Just a profound, exhausting boredom. "You're right about one thing, Vanessa," Alex said, his voice a flat, emotionless sheet of ice. "You have nothing because you are nothing. You looked at a man and only saw a bank account. Daisy looked at a penniless man with ruined hands and saw a husband." Vanessa shook her head frantically. "She's faking it. She just wanted your money. She didn't know I had any money," Alex replied quietly. He lifted Daisy's left hand deliberately, showing off the woven grass ring sitting beside the diamond. "She married a failure. She married a man who couldn't afford a real ring. She chose me when I had absolutely nothing to give her but my heart. And because of that, she gets everything I will ever own." Vanessa stared at the grass ring, the reality of her colossal failure finally crashing down upon her. She had traded the greatest empire in the world for a cheap thrill, and a girl in denim overalls had walked away with the king. She opened her mouth to beg, but Alex raised a hand. "Harrison," Alex called out. Two massive security guards immediately stepped out from the hallway. "Escort Miss Kensington out," Alex commanded. "If she ever comes within 500 feet of this building, my wife or myself again have her arrested for trespassing." "Alex, no, please." Vanessa sobbed as the guards grabbed her by the arms, dragging her backward into the elevator. The silver doors slid shut, cutting off her frantic cries, banishing her back to the cold, unforgiving streets of the city she had tried so hard to conquer. Silence returned to the penthouse. Alex let out a long breath, the tension leaving his shoulders. He turned to Daisy. "Are you all right?" Daisy smiled, reaching up to cup his face. "I'm perfectly fine, though I do think the air up here is a little thin. It makes people crazy." Alex laughed, picking her up effortlessly in his arms. Daisy squealed, wrapping her legs around his waist as he carried her toward the plush velvet sofa. "Then it's a good thing we're keeping the farm. I need my wife grounded. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. 1 year later, asterisk, asterisk." The autumn breeze sweeping through Willow Creek was gentle, carrying the sweet scent of blooming sunflowers and freshly turned earth. The Sterling farm had been completely transformed. The rotting barn was now a state-of-the-art equestrian facility. The farmhouse was a sprawling, beautiful architectural masterpiece of wood and stone, but the people inside it hadn't changed. Alexander was sitting on the wide front porch wearing his faded jeans and a flannel shirt, clumsily trying to carve a wooden toy horse with a small pocket knife. He was still terrible at working with his hands, but he refused to give up. The screen door pushed open, and Daisy stepped out. She was glowing. Her chestnut curls were tied back in a loose braid, and her hands rested gently over the unmistakable swelling curve of her pregnant belly. She walked over and sat beside him on the porch swing, resting her head on his shoulder. "You're going to chop your thumb off before the baby even gets here," Daisy teased, watching him struggle with the wood. Alex smiled, putting the knife away and placing his large hand over her belly. Almost instantly, a soft, unmistakable kick tapped against his palm. Alex's breath hitched a look of pure, unadulterated wonder washing over his face. The billionaire CEO, the ruthless titan of Wall Street, the man who controlled billions, was entirely at the mercy of the tiny life growing inside his wife. "I've secured the legacy of the company," Alex whispered, pressing a kiss to Daisy's temple. "But this is my real legacy. You, this baby, this life." Daisy leaned into him, the afternoon sun casting a golden glow over them. The town of Willow Creek no longer laughed. Brad Higgins worked as a middle manager in a town 3 counties over. Chloe had moved away. The people who remained treated the Sterlings with deep, profound respect, not just because of their wealth, but because they remembered the fierce protective love of a woman who stood by her man when the world thought he was broken. "We did good, city boy," Daisy whispered, her eyes closing in perfect peace. "We did," Alex replied, holding her tight against his heart. "We won,